first strike against my door came at 11:14 at night. It was a jagged rhythm of knuckles hitting heavy mahogany. I did not flinch. I sat in the dim light of my downtown Denver penthouse with a mug of black coffee cooling in my hand. The city stretched out below me, a grid of amber and silver cutting through the chill of the Colorado night. Another knock hit the wood. This one was frayed and desperate. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the entrance open. My cousin Derek stood in the hallway. He looked nothing like the software salesman who spent his weekends boasting on manicured golf courses. His tie hung loose, the silk was wrinkled. The sharp designer cologne he always wore had soured into the distinct scent of cold sweat and panic. "I need $100 grand, Charmaine." He said the words in a rush while his eyes darted down the quiet, carpeted corridor. "Just a bridge loan. The bank is moving on the house. I can pay you back, with interest, at whatever rate you want. You have to help me." I took a slow sip of my drink. The ceramic felt warm against my palms. I looked at my cousin. I noticed the deep scuff mark marring the toe of his expensive Italian leather loafer. It was a quiet symbol of his decaying facade. "I am just a renter, Derek." I kept my voice in an even and unbothered register. "I do not have that kind of capital to throw away." His jaw tightened. The desperation in his gaze hardened into something ugly. "You selfish failure. You want us to suffer. The family will never forgive you for letting me lose everything." He turned and stormed toward the elevators. I closed the door. The lock clicked into place, echoing the finality of a trap snapping shut. He thought I was a broke disappointment. He had no idea I was the one holding the deed to his ruin. Welcome to Idana Told Stories, where quiet women build empires in the shadows, while loud people dig their own graves. If you enjoy watching arrogant people run blindly into the walls of reality, then you are in the right place. Drop a comment telling me your age and where you are listening from tonight, and hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what happens next. To understand how my golden boy cousin ended up begging at the doorstep of the woman he openly despised, you have to look back 6 months. It started on a crisp Thanksgiving evening in Denver. The dining table at Aunt Brenda's house was a battleground disguised as a holiday gathering. Brenda held court from the head of the long, polished mahogany table. She wore her pride like heavy armor. She swirled her Cabernet. The crystal caught the light of the dining room chandelier. She directed her gaze right at me. "Taxes in Boulder are climbing again." Brenda announced this to the room, though she was not looking for sympathy. She shifted her attention to the rest of the family, and her tone dripped with practiced pity. Of course, Charmaine would not know anything about property taxes. "Are you still throwing your paycheck down the drain on that apartment lease? When are you going to stop making poor decisions and build some equity like Derek?" A murmur of agreement rippled across the table. I could hear the soft clink of silverware against china as my relatives nodded along. They viewed my quiet nature as weakness. They saw my rented downtown address as undeniable proof of financial ruin following my divorce 5 years ago. They needed me to be the broke relative. My supposed failure made their own heavily mortgaged lives feel secure and successful. I did not argue. I merely smiled and cut my turkey with precise and deliberate movements. My left hand rested near my plate. My thumb found the edge of the simple, unbranded gold watch on my wrist. I rubbed the smooth metal. It is a grounding habit I use when the people around me are loud and wrong. Brenda had often sneered at the timepiece. She called it a cheap trinket I bought to make myself feel better. Brenda did not know the watch was a vintage, bespoke Patek Philippe. It was worth more than the down payment on the house we were currently sitting in. I like the view from my building. I kept my tone mild. It gives me a good perspective on the city. Brenda scoffed and took another sip of her wine. "Perspective does not build wealth, sweetheart. You are 34 and you own nothing. It is a shame to watch you throw your life away, while Derek here is closing on a 5-bedroom estate." Derek sat 2 seats down from me. He leaned back in his chair and offered a patronizing smile. He swirled his own glass of wine and looked at me with deep, fake sympathy. "If the rent gets too high downtown, Charmaine, you can always stay in our new guest house. We have plenty of space." I let the silence stretch. I felt my phone vibrate in the pocket of my slacks. It was a text message from my commercial real estate broker. It confirmed a multi-million-dollar acquisition that Brenda could not even begin to fathom. The family wanted a victim to mock. They had no idea they were sitting across the table from their landlord. I chewed my food slowly. The rich taste of the gravy mixed with the bitter reality of my family dynamic. They thrived on comparison. They survived by stepping on anyone they deemed beneath them. When my ex-husband Ryan took our suburban home in the divorce settlement, they all thought I had lost everything. They thought Ryan took my only valuable asset. They did not know I let him have the house because I had already liquidated my real investments and moved them into an ironclad corporate entity. I traded an address for total financial freedom. I looked around the table. I saw the smug satisfaction on Brenda's face. I saw the arrogant tilt of Derek's chin. They were so sure of their superiority. They measured success by square footage and zip codes. I measured it by cash flow and leverage. Derek's wife, Jessica, sat next to him. She rested her hand on his arm and gave me a tight smile. She had spent the entire evening whispering to the other cousins in the kitchen before dinner. I had heard my name pass her lips more than once, followed by hushed laughter. It takes a lot of discipline to sit quietly while people tear your name apart. But I learned a long time ago that correcting fools is a waste of time. I let them construct their narrative. I let Jessica believe her whispers were a secret. She smelled like expensive floral perfume and insecurity. She leaned across the table. "We just want you to be safe, Charmaine." Jessica widened her eyes, attempting to look genuine. "The rental market is so unpredictable. We worry about you, especially since Ryan took so much in the divorce. It must be hard starting over from scratch." My thumb pressed harder against the gold rim of my watch. The metal was cool and grounding. Ryan took a house with a leaking roof and a depreciating neighborhood value. I walked away with liquid assets and peace of mind. But Jessica did not want to hear that. She wanted me to confirm her pity. "I am doing just fine, Jessica." I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin. "My finances are exactly where they should be." Derek chuckled. He shook his head like I was a stubborn child refusing to eat vegetables. "Pride will not pay the bills, Charm. It is okay to admit you are struggling. We are family. We are here to support you." The word family hung in the air like a threat. In this room, family meant hierarchy. It meant knowing your place and staying at the bottom so the people at the top could feel tall. I looked into Derek's eyes and saw nothing but blind arrogance. He believed his own hype. He trusted the system that handed him a heavy loan for a house he could barely afford. I felt another buzz against my leg. My broker was asking for the final signature on the commercial property transfer. The building I lived in was officially mine. I owned the concrete, the steel, the glass, and the lease of every single tenant inside it. I owned the lobby where Brenda had dropped me off an hour earlier. I will keep that in mind, Derek. I gave him a smile that did not reach my eyes. If I ever need a bailout, you will be the first person I call. The sarcasm flew right over his head. He puffed his chest out and went back to describing his custom kitchen islands. I sat back in my chair and let the ambient noise of their boasting wash over me. The smell of roasted turkey and sweet potato casserole filled the dining room. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like a waiting room. I was waiting for the market to turn. I was waiting for the interest rates to climb. I knew the fragile foundation of Derek's wealth was built on cheap credit and borrowed time. The Federal Reserve was already hinting at sharp rate hikes. When the tide went out, my family was going to realize they had been swimming naked this entire time. I did not need to shout to be heard. I just needed to let them keep talking while I kept building. The trap was set. All I had to do was watch them walk right into it. The winter air in Colorado grew sharp and biting 3 weeks after the Thanksgiving dinner. I drove my modest sedan up the winding roads toward Boulder. Derek and Jessica were hosting their official housewarming party. They had sent out heavy cardstock invitations with gold foil lettering, the kind of invitations that demanded attention and a gift. I parked on the street a block away from the address. The driveway was already full of leased luxury SUVs. I walked up the steep incline and took in the sight of my cousin's new 5-bedroom modern estate. It was a sprawling structure of glass and dark wood built into the side of a hill. It looked expensive. It also looked hollow. I stepped through the oversized double doors, and the heat of the house washed over me. The air smelled of fresh paint, raw timber, and the sharp citrus notes of whatever catering company Jessica had hired. A hired bartender stood in the foyer pouring champagne into crystal flutes. I took a glass and walked into the main living space. The room was a monument to financial overcompensation. Imported marble lined the fireplace. A custom blown glass chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling. White Italian leather sofas sat in the center of the room, positioned perfectly over a silk rug. Every single item screamed of a desperate need to impress strangers. I spotted Aunt Brenda standing near the kitchen island. She held a plate of appetizers, but she was not eating. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, taking in the lavish decorations. She looked older than she had at Thanksgiving. The confident matriarch posture had slipped, revealing a tension in her shoulders. Jessica stood next to Brenda. She leaned in close and patted the older woman's arm. I stayed near the edge of the room and watched them. Jessica wore a tight emerald green dress that looked brand new. Her smile was stiff. "You have nothing to worry about, Brenda." Jessica kept her voice low, but the acoustics of the empty hallway carried the sound right to me. "The market is hot. The house will appreciate by 20% in a year. We will have your retirement account replenished before you even need to draw from it." Brenda offered a weak nod. She rubbed her temple with 2 fingers. "I just do not like having my nest egg tied up in furniture, Jessica. That money was supposed to be a safety net." "It is an investment." Jessica corrected her with a sharp edge to her voice. "We needed the interior to match the value of the property. Derek says it builds our net worth. Just trust the process." I took a slow sip of my champagne. The liquid was dry and tasteless. The puzzle pieces snapped together in my mind with frightening clarity. Derek and Jessica had not just drained their own savings to buy this house. They had tapped into Brenda's retirement fund to furnish it. The white leather sofas, the blown glass chandelier, the imported marble, it was all bought with the money Brenda had spent 40 years saving. My aunt had tethered her entire financial survival to Derek's ego. If this house went under, Brenda would lose everything. I felt a cold calm settle in my chest. I set my glass down on a side table and smoothed the fabric of my trousers. "Charmaine, you made it." I turned to see Derek walking toward me. He held a glass of scotch in one hand. He wore a tailored navy blazer and a smug grin. He looked like a man who believed he had just conquered the world. He clapped me on the shoulder, a little too hard. "I did not think you would drive all the way up here in that old car of yours." Derek gestured around the room with his drink. "What do you think of the place? It is a step up from a downtown rental, right? It is very spacious." I kept my expression neutral. "You must be very proud." Proud is an understatement. He puffed his chest out. "I worked the system, Charm. You have to know how to leverage other people's money to build real wealth." Speaking of which, I was talking to Jessica earlier. We know the rental market in Denver is getting tight. If your landlord decides to hike your lease or kick you out, you do not have to panic. We have a finished guest house over the garage. We can let you stay there for a few months until you get back on your feet. He said it loud enough for a passing couple to hear. He wanted an audience for his fake generosity. He wanted to play the benevolent rich cousin saving the destitute relative. I appreciate the offer, Derek. I let my thumb graze the edge of my vintage watch, but my landlord is very reasonable. I do not think I will be evicted anytime soon. "Suit yourself," Derek shrugged, "but the offer stands. Come into the study. I want to show you something." I followed him down a short hallway and into a home office. The room smelled of fresh leather and unread books. A heavy oak desk sat in the center. Derek walked behind it and picked up a thick stack of papers bound by a black clip. He practically shoved the documents into my hands. "Look at that," he pointed to the top page. "That is how you buy a multi-million-dollar property." I negotiated the terms myself. The bank practically threw the money at me. "I want you to read it. Maybe you can learn a thing or two about real estate finance. I looked down at the paperwork. The logo printed at the top of the page belonged to Apex Regional Bank. It was a mid-sized lender known for taking on high-risk portfolios. My commercial broker had mentioned them recently. They were hungry for market share and handing out risky loans to unqualified buyers. I flipped past the cover sheet. As a financial auditor, reading contracts was second nature to me. I did not see numbers and legal jargon. I saw a story. And the story written on Derek's mortgage approval was a tragedy waiting to happen. He had signed an adjustable rate mortgage. The structure was a textbook financial trap. The initial interest rate was set artificially low for the first 12 months, giving him the illusion of an affordable monthly payment. But buried in the fine print on page 4 was the reset clause. After 1 year, the rate would unfreeze and tie itself directly to the prime market index without a protective cap. I did the math in my head. If the federal interest rates shifted even a fraction of a percent, Derek's monthly payment would double. If the rates climbed higher, he would be paying thousands of dollars more every single month just to cover the interest. He had put less than 5% down on the property. He had zero equity. He was effectively renting the house from Apex Regional Bank while carrying all the liability. I stared at the black ink on the white paper. This was not a mortgage. It was a financial guillotine. Derek leaned against the edge of the desk. He crossed his arms and offered a wide, confident smile. Brilliant, right? The initial payment is a joke. I am taking the difference and putting it back into the stock market. It is free money. I looked up from the contract. I looked at my cousin's face. He was so incredibly certain of his own genius. He had dragged his wife into this mess. He had drained his own mother's retirement fund to buy furniture he could not afford. He was standing on a trap door and bragging about the view. A year ago, I might have tried to warn him. I might have pointed to the reset clause and explained the devastating risk. I might have tried to save Brenda from the inevitable fallout. But then I remembered Thanksgiving. I remembered the mockery, the whispers, the blatant disrespect. I remembered how much they enjoyed tearing me down to make themselves feel taller. They did not want my advice. They wanted my submission. I closed the folder. I aligned the edges of the paper so they were perfectly straight. I handed the heavy stack of documents back to him. It looks very complicated, Derek. I kept my voice soft and deliberately naive. You clearly know a lot more about banks than I do. He snatched the folder back with a satisfied smirk. It just takes a little courage, Charmaine. You have to be willing to take a risk if you want to play in the big leagues. You should think about taking a leap sometime. You cannot play it safe forever. I will definitely keep that in mind. I turned toward the door. I should go mingle. Thank you for the tour. I walked out of the study and navigated my way back through the crowded living room. The string quartet was playing a classical arrangement of a pop song. Jessica was laughing loudly at a joke someone made. Brenda was still standing by the kitchen island, looking at the custom chandelier with tired, anxious eyes. I reached the front door and stepped out into the freezing Colorado night. The cold air hit my lungs like a physical blow, clearing the scent of perfume and fresh paint from my senses. I walked down the steep driveway toward my car. The gravel crunched softly under my boots. I unlocked the driver's side door and slid into the quiet interior of my sedan. The heater hummed to life. I sat in the dark and looked back up the hill at the glowing windows of the mansion. The silhouette of my cousin moved past the glass holding his drink. My phone vibrated in my purse. The screen lit up the dark car interior. It was an urgent news notification from a Financial Times app. I tapped the screen and read the headline. The Federal Reserve announces an emergency policy meeting. Chairman signals an unexpected and sharp increase in interest rates starting next quarter to combat rising inflation. I stared at the glowing words. The fuse was officially lit. The cheap credit that built Derek's temporary kingdom was about to vanish. The adjustable rate on his mortgage would reset and trigger a financial avalanche he could not stop. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I did not feel pity. I did not feel anger. I felt the profound calm of a woman watching the tide go out. I drove back toward my apartment building in Denver, the building I owned, the building that was insulated from the coming storm. The market was shifting. The truth was going to catch up to them very soon, and I was going to be ready when it did. The drive back down the mountain from Boulder was dark and silent. I kept the radio off. The heater hummed a steady low note, filling the interior of my sedan with warm air. Seeing my cousin cling so desperately to that fragile piece of real estate reminded me of another man who made the exact same mistake. It pulled my mind back 5 years to a memory I rarely entertained. I stood in the middle of a spacious suburban living room. The walls were painted a soft, neutral beige. The hardwood floors gleamed under the warm glow of the recessed lighting. It was the house Ryan and I had purchased shortly after our wedding. It was supposed to be our forever home. Instead, it had become the battleground for our divorce. Ryan stood near the front door holding a thick manila folder. It contained our final settlement agreement. He wore a crisp, tailored suit. He stood with his shoulders squared and his chin tilted up. He radiated the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just claimed the ultimate prize. "I want the house, Charmaine." His voice echoed off the bare walls. We had already packed most of our shared belongings into cardboard boxes stacked in the dining room. "I know you love the neighborhood, but let us be practical about this. I make the higher salary. I can afford the property taxes and the upkeep. You can take whatever cash is left in the joint checking account and get a nice little apartment somewhere." I looked around the empty room. I heard the hollow sound of my own breathing bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. The air smelled faintly of cardboard and pine cleaner. I did not fight him. I did not cry or raise my voice to demand fairness. I walked over to the kitchen island and pressed my fingertips against the cold, smooth surface of the granite counter. I realized right then that tying my self-worth to a zip code was a dangerous trap. A house was just wood and drywall and debt. It was a heavy liability dressed up as a status symbol. "You can have it, Ryan." I kept my voice perfectly level. "Just sign the waiver on the rest of my individual accounts, and the property is yours." He signed the papers so fast the tip of his pen almost tore through the page. He thought he was walking away with the crown jewel of our marriage. He viewed my quick surrender as pathetic weakness. He did not realize I had spent the previous 6 months quietly liquidating my individual stock portfolios. I had moved the capital into a newly formed corporate entity, shielding it behind layers of legal protection. While he secured a depreciating suburban structure with a leaking roof, I secured total financial mobility. I walked out of that house with nothing but a suitcase and the keys to my future empire. I pulled my car into the secure underground garage of my downtown building, bringing my focus back to the present. The memory faded into the past, where it belonged. I rode the private elevator up to my penthouse. I thought my history with Ryan was a closed chapter. I severely underestimated the reach of my aunt's desperation. The disruption arrived 3 days later. I was sitting at the heavy oak desk in my private office, reviewing the quarterly tax assessments for my commercial properties. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling glass, casting long shadows across the room. My assistant opened the frosted glass door and stepped inside. She looked hesitant. She held a thick envelope against her chest. "There is a man in the lobby to see you, Charmaine." She lowered her voice as if someone might overhear. He refused to give his name. He bypassed the receptionist and said it is an urgent legal matter. I closed my laptop. "Send him in." A man wearing a wrinkled windbreaker walked into my office. He carried a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He did not make small talk. He did not introduce himself or offer a handshake. He simply reached into his bag, pulled out a folded document, and dropped it onto the center of my desk. Charmaine Harris. He stated my name like a routine fact-checking exercise. "You have been served." He turned and walked out before I could reply. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind him. The air in the room suddenly felt dense. I stared at the paper resting on the polished mahogany. I reached out and picked up the document. It was a court summons. I ran my thumb over the signature line at the bottom of the page. The cold, stark blue ink of the process server's pen was bleeding slightly into the cheap, recycled paper. I read the formal heading printed at the top. It was a motion filed in the county family court. The petitioner listed on the document was Ryan. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The leather creaked softly in the quiet office. I read the detailed paragraphs outlining his legal claims. Ryan was petitioning a judge to reopen our finalized divorce settlement. He was alleging fraud. He claimed to have obtained newly discovered evidence showing I had hidden marital assets during the final months of our marriage. He was demanding a full forensic audit of all my personal finances and a mandatory redistribution of wealth. My pulse remained steady, but a distinct chill settled into my bones. Ryan was not smart enough to dig into my financial history on his own. He lacked the discipline and the resources to execute a trace. Someone had fed him this information. Someone who hated me enough to weaponize my past and disrupt my present. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a number I rarely used. It belonged to a private security consultant I kept on a generous retainer for my commercial properties. "I need you to trace a leak." I spoke clearly into the receiver. Someone pulled a partial banking record on my old personal checking account, the one from 5 years ago. Find out who requested it and how they bypassed the privacy protocols. The consultant called me back less than 2 hours later. The answer he provided confirmed my worst suspicions. A low-tier private investigator operating out of a rundown strip mall in Aurora had bribed a junior bank teller. The teller accessed a printed ledger of my old transactions. The ledger showed a substantial transfer of cash exiting my account 2 months before my divorce was finalized. It did not show where the money went because I had routed it through a blind holding company before bringing it back to fund my domestic limited liability company. But it showed just enough movement to trigger a legal inquiry. And who hired this investigator? I asked the question while watching the afternoon traffic crawl along the avenue far below my window. A woman named Brenda. The consultant read the name straight from his digital screen. She paid the initial retainer in cash last week. I ended the call and set the phone down on my desk. The scattered pieces of the puzzle locked together, forming a very ugly picture. Brenda was terrified. The market was shifting. The variable rate mortgage on Derek's mansion was turning into a financial sinkhole. She had leveraged her entire retirement to buy his imported furniture. If Derek went bankrupt, she went down with him. She refused to believe I was broke. Her pride would not allow her to accept that the niece she mocked was actually doing better than her golden boy son. She hired the cheap investigator, hoping to find a secret stash of cash she could guilt me into surrendering to save the family. Instead, the investigator found the old cash transfer. Brenda did not understand corporate structures or holding companies. She just saw a large sum of money moving right before my divorce. She contacted Ryan. She handed him the ledger. She thought if Ryan sued me and uncovered my supposed savings, I would be forced to settle out of court. She assumed I would panic and beg the family for help, allowing them to control whatever funds remained. She had no idea she was playing with fire. By sending Ryan after my accounts, she was threatening the very foundation of my sanctuary. If a judge granted the forensic audit, Ryan's lawyers might pierce the corporate veil. They might connect my personal name to the commercial entity. They would see the luxury apartment complex. They would see the retail strip malls. They would see an empire worth more than their collective imaginations could process. Ryan thought he was coming after a modest savings account. He thought he was going to take half of a small rainy day fund. He intended to strip me of the meager safety net my family believed I had. I picked up the summons again. The cheap paper felt gritty between my fingers. They wanted to drag me back into a courtroom. They wanted to force me to justify my existence to a judge. They thought I was the same quiet woman who walked away from a suburban house 5 years ago without a fight. I reached for my heavy leather planner. I opened it to a blank page and uncapped my fountain pen. I needed to call my estate attorney to fortify the legal walls around my corporate entities. But more importantly, I needed to understand the social mechanics of their attack. Brenda was not acting alone. She needed an echo chamber to validate her paranoia. She needed someone to help spread the narrative that I was a deceitful fraud trying to hoard wealth while Derek suffered. I did not have to wait long to find out who was amplifying her whispers. Later that evening, I attended a charity gala for local Denver business leaders. The event was held in a grand ballroom downtown. I wore a simple black evening gown and kept to the perimeter of the room. A string quartet played softly over the clinking of champagne flutes. I stood near an intricate ice sculpture watching the crowd. That was when I saw her, a familiar face moving through a tight circle of wealthy socialites. She was smiling, holding a martini, and telling a story that had everyone leaning in. The war was no longer contained to family dinners and private investigators. It was going public, and the rumors were spreading fast. The charity gala buzzed with the low hum of privilege. I stood near a towering ice sculpture of a swan. The cold radiating from the carved wings felt grounding. Across the ballroom, Jessica held court. She wore a silver sequin dress catching the ambient light with every movement. A tight circle of Denver socialites surrounded her. She held a martini glass. The ice cubes clinked against the crystal as her hand trembled slightly. It was a tiny physical tell, betraying the hidden financial anxiety gnawing at her. Yet her voice carried a tone of practiced concern. It is just so tragic. Jessica leaned in to ensure the group hung on her every word. We offered her our guest house. But pride is a terrible disease. Ryan took almost everything in the settlement, and now she is drowning. We just pray she does not end up on the street. The women murmured in sympathetic tones. They loved a tragedy as long as it belonged to someone else. Standing directly across from Jessica in that circle was Maya. Maya was Ryan's sister. She was a brilliant African-American corporate strategist who navigated these high-wealth circles with effortless grace. She wore a tailored burgundy pantsuit that commanded respect. When Ryan and I divorced 5 years ago, the family assumed Maya would cut ties with me. They expected her to side with blood. They did not know Maya had reviewed the settlement documents. She saw her brother's greed. She saw my quiet exit. From that day forward, she became my silent ally. Right now, she was nodding along to Jessica's fabricated story, playing the role of the concerned former sister-in-law perfectly. Yes, it is a very difficult situation, Maya offered a solemn sigh. My brother worries about her too. It is hard to watch someone spiral down like this. Jessica smiled. It was the smile of a woman who felt validated. She excused herself from the circle and turned toward the bar. She spotted me standing by the sculpture. Her eyes lit up with predatory excitement. She walked over, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Charmaine. Jessica placed a hand over her heart, feigning surprise. I did not expect to see you here. Tickets for this event are quite steep. Did your firm cover the entry fee? I attended on behalf of a client. I kept my posture relaxed. It is a lovely evening. Jessica reached into her silver clutch purse. She pulled out a thick cardstock rectangle and slid it across the cocktail table toward me. I know you are going through a lot right now. I have a friend who specializes in personal bankruptcy. He gives free consultations. You should call him before things get worse. There is no shame in starting over. I looked down at the business card. The gold embossed lettering caught the chandelier light. I did not pick it up. Thank you, Jessica. I offered a polite nod. I will keep that in mind if I ever need legal intervention. She turned and walked away, radiating triumph. She thought she had humiliated me. She thought her whisper campaign was working. I caught Maya's eye across the room. Maya gave a slow, deliberate blink. We had work to do. The next morning, I met Maya at a discreet coffee shop on the edge of the financial district. We sat in a corner booth shielded by tall indoor plants. The scent of roasted espresso beans masked the quiet intensity of our conversation. Brenda is escalating. Maya took a sip of her dark roast. Her private investigator is still digging. They are convinced you have a hidden cache of money from the divorce. Brenda thinks if Ryan sues you and drains your accounts, she can swoop in and force you to hand over whatever is left to save Derek. I traced the rim of my ceramic mug. They will not stop looking until they find something to justify their paranoia. If they keep prodding the bank tellers, they might accidentally stumble onto the corporate holding shell. I cannot risk them piercing the limited liability veil, then give them something else to find. Maya set her cup down. Her mind operated like a chess grandmaster, always calculating 3 moves ahead. Feed their delusion. Give them a piece of bait so satisfying they swallow the hook and stop swimming around your real assets. I watched the morning commuters rush past the cafe window. Maya was right. A predator stops hunting once it secures a meal. I needed to manufacture a meal. I needed to create a paper trail of desperation. I left the coffee shop and drove to a small local credit union located far from my usual banking networks. I walked into the modest lobby. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I sat down with the junior loan officer and filled out a stack of physical paperwork. I applied for a $5,000 personal unsecured loan. I listed my occupation as an independent consultant. I used my personal name and my current apartment address. I deliberately left the collateral section blank, ensuring the application looked precarious. The loan officer reviewed the pages with a sympathetic expression, noting the lack of solid domestic assets under my personal Social Security number. It was the exact profile of a struggling renter. The application was filed into their system, creating a definitive, verifiable digital footprint. 2 days later, Maya set the trap in motion. She attended a Sunday brunch at Brenda's house. While sipping mimosas, Maya casually mentioned a rumor she heard from a friend in the local banking sector. She suggested Charmaine was seen filling out hardship loan applications. Brenda took the bait instantly. She contacted her chief investigator. She ordered him to run a fresh credit inquiry. By Tuesday afternoon, the investigator reported back with his findings. He confirmed a recent credit pull for a meager personal loan at a small credit union. Maya called me that evening. Her laughter was soft and victorious over the phone. "Brenda is throwing a celebration," Maya reported. "She told Derek you are officially destitute. They think Ryan backed you into a corner and you are scrambling for pennies to pay basic living expenses. Jessica has already texted 3 different people claiming you are facing imminent eviction. They stopped looking for hidden accounts because they found a desperate plea for $5,000. The echo chamber was sealed tight. They locked themselves inside a narrative of their own making. They were so blinded by the thrill of my supposed downfall, they did not notice the storm gathering right above their heads. I ended the call with Maya and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The Denver skyline glittered against the dark night. I pulled my laptop from its leather sleeve and set it on the glass dining table. The diversion worked flawlessly. The family was busy analyzing my fake poverty. My real wealth was now operating in the shadows, free from their scrutiny. I logged into my encrypted commercial banking terminal. The screen glowed with columns of numbers, verifying the robust cash reserves held by my corporate entity. I navigated past the domestic accounts and accessed the offshore routing system. I initiated a series of large wire transfers. The funds moved silently across international borders, securing capital for the next phase of my strategy. I was preparing to purchase a significant block of distressed residential debt from Apex Regional Bank, the very institution holding Derek's failing variable rate mortgage. My fingers glided across the keyboard. Every keystroke was a measured step toward securing the ultimate leverage. My aunt believed I was begging for spare change. She had no concept of the silent ledger sitting right in front of me. She did not realize the woman she labeled a broke failure was currently orchestrating the financial acquisition of her son's entire existence. The trap was ready. It was time to pull the curtain back and review the true balance of power. The penthouse apartment was a testament to deliberate restraint. Wide planks of reclaimed oak stretched across the floor, meeting vast floor-to-ceiling windows. Charmaine Harris stood in the center of the room. She looked out over the glowing grid of downtown Denver. The low, steady hum of city traffic drifted through the thick glass. It was a comforting frequency. It was the sound of the empire she had built in total silence. For years, her relatives had pictured her living in a cramped studio. They imagined her scraping together monthly rent payments and fearing the first of every month. They mocked her for lacking equity. They did not understand that equity was a narrow concept for people who thought small. She walked over to the solid walnut dining table. A heavy leather-bound ledger rested in the exact center. She reached out and traced the spine. The cured leather felt cool and supple beneath her fingertips. She opened the cover. The thick parchment pages crackled softly in the quiet room. This book contained the true architecture of her life. It held the records for C. Harris Holdings Limited Liability Company. She ran her index finger down the first column of the current fiscal year. The numbers printed in crisp black ink represented commercial leases, retail strip centers, and residential properties. Her finger stopped at the primary asset. The address listed was the exact location she was standing in right now. Charmaine was not a renter. She did not have a landlord. Her corporate entity owned this entire luxury apartment complex outright. She owned the marble lobby. She owned the high-speed elevators. She owned the state-of-the-art fitness center, and every single residential unit stacked beneath her feet. When her Aunt Brenda dropped her off at the curb after family dinners, Brenda thought she was returning a defeated woman to a temporary shelter. Brenda had no idea she was leaving the owner at the gates of her own kingdom. A soft chime echoed from the intercom panel mounted on the wall near the kitchen. Charmaine left the ledger open and walked over to the terminal. She pressed the illuminated silver button. "Yes, Marcus." She spoke clearly into the microphone. "Good evening, Miss Harris." The voice of her head concierge flowed through the speaker. His tone remained perfectly professional, but carried a subtle undertone of irritation. "I apologize for the late disturbance. We have a minor situation at the front desk. A gentleman is currently standing in the lobby asking intrusive questions about your residency status." Charmaine tapped the screen to activate the live security feed. The high-definition camera mounted above the reception desk provided a clear overhead view of the ground floor. A man wearing a wrinkled beige trench coat stood dangerously close to the concierge station. It was the same cheap private investigator Brenda had hired to pull the banking records. "What kind of questions, Marcus?" Charmaine asked while watching the man gesture wildly on the monitor. "He is claiming to be an authorized debt collector," Marcus replied smoothly. "He is demanding to know if you are delinquent on your monthly rent payments. He even offered me a $50 bill to print a copy of your lease agreement. He insists you are facing imminent eviction and says he needs proof for a court filing." A quiet laugh escaped Charmaine's lips. The dramatic irony was almost too rich to consume. Downstairs, a man hired by her desperate aunt was standing on imported Italian marble that Charmaine had personally selected. He was breathing air-conditioned by a system Charmaine had recently upgraded. He was trying to bribe an employee whose paycheck was signed by Charmaine's holding company. He was digging for dirt in a garden she owned. "Have you accepted his generous bribe, Marcus?" She kept her tone light. "I told him our records are strictly confidential." The concierge sounded deeply unamused. "I also informed him that attempting to bribe building staff is grounds for trespassing. Would you like me to have security escort him off the premises?" Charmaine watched the investigator lean over the desk. He looked frantic. Brenda must have doubled his daily rate, demanding immediate proof of the fake eviction. The urge to end the charade flared hot in her chest. She could instruct Marcus to print the deed to the building. She could have the concierge hand the legal document to the investigator with her name printed on the ownership line. The investigator would run back to Brenda with the paper. The illusion would shatter tonight. Her family would experience the ultimate humiliation, realizing their target was a titan. Her hand hovered over the intercom button. The temptation to crush them instantly was intoxicating. It would feel so good to watch their arrogant faces crumble. But she pulled her hand back. She closed her eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath. The cool air filled her lungs, settling her racing pulse. Discipline had built this empire. Emotion would only compromise it. If she revealed her hand right now, Brenda and Derek would have time to pivot. They would realize she had deep pockets. They would drop their hostile tactics and switch to emotional manipulation. They would cry and beg for a bailout. They would use the ties of blood to demand her wealth. She needed them to stay hostile. She needed them to feel victorious. A predator never looks up when it believes it has cornered its prey. Patience was a far more lethal weapon than a quick reveal. No, Marcus. Charmaine pressed the transmit button again. Do not throw him out. Tell him I have been struggling to make the payments. Tell him I asked for a lease extension last week and management denied it. Give him exactly what he wants to hear. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Marcus was a highly trained hospitality professional. He did not ask questions. Understood, Ms. Harris. I will handle it discreetly. Have a pleasant evening. The intercom clicked off. Charmaine watched the silent security feed. Marcus leaned forward and spoke to the investigator. The investigator suddenly smiled. He slapped his hand on the desk in triumph. He turned and practically jogged out of the lobby, passing through the revolving glass doors and disappearing into the Denver night. He was rushing back to tell Brenda the good news. Charmaine was broke. Charmaine was falling apart. She walked away from the monitor and returned to the walnut dining table. She looked down at the open ledger. The numbers stared back at her, offering cold, hard truth. She was insulated from the outside world, but the outside world was about to catch fire. She reached for a sleek television remote and turned on the flat screen mounted on the far wall. A late-night financial news network was broadcasting a breaking alert. A stern-looking anchor sat behind a sleek desk. The red ticker tape scrolled rapidly across the bottom of the screen. The anchor spoke with urgent precision. The Federal Reserve has just confirmed a series of historic interest rate hikes. The changes will go into effect immediately at the start of the next business day. Analysts are predicting a severe contraction in the housing market. Variable rate loans are expected to reach critical risk levels within the next 48 hours. Charmaine lowered the volume. The room fell quiet except for the hum of the city traffic below. She looked back at her ledger. She thought about Derek's 5-bedroom mansion in Boulder. She thought about his adjustable-rate mortgage tied to the prime index. She thought about the arrogant smirk on his face when he handed her the loan documents, bragging about free money. The free money was gone. The economic tide was pulling back with terrifying speed. The trap she had been patiently watching was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a mathematical certainty. Derek was about to wake up to a financial nightmare. His loan payments were going to skyrocket beyond his monthly income. His software commissions would dry up as the tech sector braced for the recession. The house he bought to prove his superiority was about to become his prison. She picked up her fountain pen and turned to a fresh page in the ledger. She wrote down the name of Apex Regional Bank. The bank held Derek's debt. The bank was about to face a severe liquidity crisis due to all the bad loans they had handed out to arrogant buyers like her cousin. They would need to offload their distressed assets fast. They would sell them at a steep discount to anyone holding liquid cash. Charmaine had a very large amount of liquid cash. She capped the pen. The soft click echoed in the minimalist space. The whisper campaign, the fake loans, the private investigators, all of it was just noise. The real battle was about to begin on a balance sheet. The market was shifting. The dominoes were starting to fall. And Derek was standing right at the end of the line. She just needed to wait for the knock on her door. The morning after the broadcast, the air in Denver felt tangibly heavier. The economic shift did not arrive with a loud crash. It crept in like a winter frost, killing the vibrant green foliage of the city's unchecked greed. The Federal Reserve executed the rate hike. It was a sharp upward spike intended to choke inflation, but it acted as a scythe swinging through the Colorado housing market. I sat in my office and watched the financial indicators turn red across my dual monitors. The tech sector took the first hit. Venture capital firms closed their wallets. Startups that operated on borrowed time and cheap credit announced sudden, sweeping layoffs. The ripple effect washed over the upscale suburbs immediately. Derek built his entire identity on selling enterprise software to those exact companies. He relied on exorbitant quarterly commissions to fund his luxury lifestyle. He needed those oversized checks to pay for the designer clothes, the leased vehicles, and the extravagant dinners he loved to post online. But when the corporate budgets froze, his sales pipeline shattered. Maya sent me a text message early that Tuesday. She kept her ear to the ground in the corporate world. She sent a screenshot of an internal memo from Derek's employer. The software firm was halting all commission payouts and restructuring their sales department. Derek's primary source of income evaporated overnight. He was suddenly living on a meager base salary that barely covered his grocery bill. That was only the first domino to fall. The second domino was the house. The anniversary of his closing date arrived. The protective 12-month window on his adjustable rate mortgage expired. The loan unthawed. Apex Regional Bank followed the strict letter of the contract Derek had signed so proudly. They recalculated his interest rate based on the new soaring federal index. His monthly obligation did not just increase, it multiplied. The new payment demanded more cash than he brought home in an entire month. Apex Regional Bank was acting out of sheer panic. The institution had overextended itself by handing out thousands of these toxic loans to unqualified buyers. As the market contracted, the bank began bleeding capital. Their balance sheets turned toxic. They desperately needed liquidity to survive the impending regulatory audits. They could not afford to offer grace periods or negotiate payment plans with delinquent homeowners. They needed cash, or they needed to liquidate the assets. The system Derek trusted to elevate him into the upper echelon of society was now a cold, mechanical beast preparing to swallow him whole. The illusion of my family's untouchable wealth began to crack in public. I was drinking my morning tea when I opened my social media feed. My thumb scrolled past the usual advertisements and news updates. I stopped on a post from Aunt Brenda. Brenda treated her profile like a digital trophy case. She usually uploaded staged photographs of her country club lunches, her expensive jewelry, and lengthy paragraphs praising her successful son. Her posts were always decorated with sparkling emojis and exclamation points. Today, the screen showed a stark text box. The background was plain gray. I am asking my community for prayers during some unexpected trials. The Lord tests his strongest soldiers. Please keep our family in your thoughts. There were no pictures of wine glasses. There were no arrogant emojis. There was no mention of real estate or software sales. It was a vague, frantic plea broadcasted to the world. It was the sound of a woman watching her safety net unravel. She had tied her retirement funds to Jessica's interior design ambitions. With Derek's finances collapsing, Brenda was standing on the edge of her own personal cliff. I set my phone face down on the glass table. I did not feel the urge to gloat. Gloating requires an emotional investment. I felt the sharp focus of an auditor reviewing a failing ledger. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad. I uncapped my fountain pen. The steel nib hovered over the lined paper. I began to chart my cousin's financial trajectory. I did not use guesswork. I used the raw data I had gathered over the past 6 months. I wrote down his estimated base salary. I subtracted the new punishing mortgage payment required by Apex Regional Bank. I deducted the estimated property taxes for Boulder. I factored in the luxury vehicle leases, the utilities for a 5-bedroom estate, and the minimum payments on the credit cards Jessica used to maintain her socialite facade. The ink flowed across the page, forming columns of undeniable truth. The math was cold and unforgiving. His burn rate was astronomical. The negative cash flow was devouring whatever small cash reserves he might have kept hidden. I traced a line down the paper, calculating the days. I knew he would miss the first mortgage payment out of sheer shock. He would likely call the bank demanding a reduction. The bank would refuse. He would miss the second payment because he literally lacked the funds. By the third missed payment, the bank would initiate the pre-foreclosure process. I circled a specific date on the legal pad. It was 35 days from the moment his interest rate reset. On that day, his bank accounts would hit zero. He would exhaust every available line of credit. His pride would prevent him from asking his wealthy friends for a bailout because he could not bear the humiliation of admitting his failure. Brenda could not help him because her cash was trapped inside his depreciating house. He would look for a target. He would look for someone he considered weak. He would look for the relative he believed was drowning in a tiny rental apartment. He would assume that since I applied for a small credit union loan, I must have some desperate emergency stash of cash he could bully out of me. He would convince himself that taking my last dollar was his birthright. I stared at the circled date on the yellow paper. The timeline was precise. The days bled into weeks. The temperature in Denver dropped as winter tightened its grip on the city. The financial news grew more dire. Foreclosure signs began to sprout like weeds on the manicured lawns of upscale neighborhoods. The whispers in Maya's corporate circles confirmed that Derek's firm had executed another round of silent layoffs. I maintained my routine. I reviewed my commercial portfolios. I authorized the transfer of liquid capital into my blind holding company. I prepared my resources for the upcoming auction block. Apex Regional Bank was quietly packaging their distressed residential debts into bulk portfolios. They were getting ready to sell off their bad loans to private equity firms at a steep discount to save their own skin. I positioned my corporate entity to be the first buyer in line when that specific portfolio hit the market. The evening of the circled date finally arrived. The sun dipped below the Rocky Mountains, casting long, dark shadows across the downtown skyline. I stood in my kitchen, brewing a fresh pot of dark roast coffee. The scent of the bitter beans filled the quiet penthouse. I poured the steaming liquid into a ceramic mug. The digital clock on the oven display read 11 in the evening. The city below was settling into a quiet rhythm. I walked into the living room and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glass felt cold against my fingertips. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner. I thought about the housewarming party. I thought about the cruel jokes and the deliberate attempts to humiliate me. They spent years building a narrative where I was the tragic failure and they were the untouchable elites. The math on my legal pad proved otherwise. Gravity was finally taking hold. A sharp, jagged sound shattered the silence of my apartment. It was the heavy strike of knuckles hitting mahogany. The rhythm was frayed and desperate. It was the sound of a man who had run out of time and options. I did not flinch. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The hot liquid slid down my throat. The timeline had caught up to the present moment. The trap was fully baited. The prey had arrived right on schedule. I set the mug down on a coaster. I walked across the reclaimed oak floor toward the front entrance. I reached out and unlocked the deadbolt, ready to open the door and welcome my cousin to the end of his illusion. I pulled the heavy mahogany door open. Derek stood in the hallway threshold. The polished software salesman from the Boulder housewarming party was gone. He pushed past me without an invitation and stepped into my foyer. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He wore the same navy blazer from weeks ago, but the fabric hung loosely on his shoulders. The sharp designer cologne he favored had soured, mixing with the unmistakable scent of stale sweat and sheer panic. I closed the door and turned to face him. He did not look at the curated art on my walls or the sweeping views of the Denver skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass. His eyes darted around the room, seeking an anchor he could not find. He paced like a caged animal trapped in a concrete enclosure. "I need $100 grand, Charmaine." He blurted the words out before I could even offer him a seat. His voice cracked on the final syllable, exposing the raw terror underneath. "Just a bridge loan. The bank is moving on the house faster than I anticipated. I can pay you back with interest at whatever rate you want. You have to help me." He continued to pace across the reclaimed oak planks of my living room. His frantic steps shattered the quiet sanctuary I had carefully cultivated. I watched his erratic movements. My gaze drifted downward and locked onto his footwear. He wore a pair of imported Italian leather loafers. I remembered seeing them at his party, shining with a pristine, glossy finish. Now I noticed a deep, ugly scuff mark marring the toe of his right shoe. The damaged leather exposed the raw, dull material beneath the surface. It was a glaring physical symbol of his decaying facade. His foundation was permanently ruined. Derek stopped pacing and pivoted toward me. He tried to force a confident smile, but his facial muscles twitched, betraying his anxiety. "I am offering you a unique opportunity here." He adjusted his wrinkled silk tie, attempting to regain some semblance of authority. "You have been sitting on the sidelines for years. You applied for that credit union loan, so I know you were trying to get liquid. If you scrape together the funds to help me, I will give you a solid return on your investment. It is a favor to you, honestly. You can finally get a piece of real estate action. His toxicity remained entirely intact even while he was begging for his financial life. He could not bring himself to admit defeat. He had to frame his desperate plea as a benevolent gesture to his supposedly struggling cousin. He wanted me to hand over a fortune and thank him for the privilege. He needed to maintain his position at the top of our family hierarchy, even as the floor collapsed beneath him. I walked over to the kitchen island. I picked up my ceramic mug and took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee. The bitter liquid grounded my thoughts. I looked at the panicked man standing in my living room, trying to sell me a sinking ship. I am just a renter, Derek. My voice remained even and unbothered. I kept my tone devoid of malice or pity. I do not have that kind of capital to throw away on a failing mortgage. His forced smile vanished. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, sickly hue. What do you mean you do not have it? He took an aggressive step toward me. His tone shifted from a desperate pitch to a demanding growl. You have zero expenses. You live in a basic apartment. Ryan left you with nothing, but you must have saved something from your consulting gigs. Do not lie to me, Charmaine. I set the mug down on a stone coaster. The ceramic clinked softly against the hard surface. I am not lying to you. I stated the fact clearly and simply. I cannot give you $100,000. The refusal hit him like a physical blow. He stared at me for a long, heavy moment. The reality of his situation finally breached his thick walls of denial. He was out of options. Apex Regional Bank was going to take his 5-bedroom estate. His luxury vehicles would be repossessed. His carefully curated social standing was about to evaporate into thin air. He would have to explain his failure to Jessica and Brenda. When the fear peaked, it mutated into blind, vicious rage. You selfish failure, Derek spat the words across the kitchen counter. His hands balled into tight fists at his sides. You have always been jealous of me. You sit here in your rented box judging the rest of us because you could not keep a husband, and you cannot afford a real life. You want us to suffer. You are enjoying this. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I let his insults hit the invisible shield I had built over the past 5 years. His words were hollow. They were the frantic lashings of a drowning man trying to pull someone else under the water with him. He needed a scapegoat to blame for his own foolish decisions. I came to you as family. Derek continued his acidic tirade. His volume escalated with every sentence bouncing off the high ceilings of the penthouse. Mom told me you were bitter, but I thought you would step up when it mattered. You are a parasite, Charmaine. The family will never forgive you for letting me lose everything. When the bank takes my home, it will be your fault. You will die alone in a leased apartment and nobody will care. He did not wait for my response. He spun on his scuffed heel and marched toward the front door. He grabbed the brass handle and yanked the heavy wood open. He stepped out into the corridor and slammed the door behind him with enough force to rattle the picture frames on my walls. The sharp echo of the slam faded quickly. The quiet hum of the city traffic drifted back into the room, wrapping me in silence. I stood alone in the center of my home. My pulse remained steady. I did not feel the sting of his harsh words. I felt the profound satisfaction of a hunter, watching the prey step precisely onto the trigger plate. Derek had chosen to attack me rather than take responsibility for his own reckless greed. He had decided I was the villain in his story. He gave me the final justification I needed to execute the financial acquisition. I walked back to my office and booted up my encrypted terminal. I navigated to the secure portal connecting my holding company to the distressed asset division of Apex Regional Bank. The bulk portfolio containing Derek's mortgage was ready for transfer. The trap was fully baited and the safety catch was off. But a new alert flashed across my secondary monitor before I could finalize the digital paperwork. The notification chimed with a sharp mechanical ping. It was a secure message from my estate attorney. The subject line read, "Urgent Court Filing Review." I clicked the encrypted link. A scanned legal document appeared on the screen. It was an official notice from the county family court. Ryan had pushed his motion forward. He had leveraged the illegally obtained banking records Brenda provided him. He was requesting an emergency hearing to freeze my personal assets and compel a forensic audit of my financial history. My ex-husband was moving faster than I anticipated. He believed he had cornered me. He thought the old bank transfer was the smoking gun he needed to reopen the divorce settlement and strip me of my supposed savings. He was blinded by the exact same arrogance that was currently destroying Derek. Ryan assumed my quiet exit 5 years ago was an admission of defeat. He never bothered to look closer at the documents he forced me to sign. He never realized that in his rush to secure the suburban house, he had stepped into a legal labyrinth I designed specifically for him. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and studied the scanned court summons. The attack was coming from 2 fronts now. My cousin was demanding my surrender in my living room, while my ex-husband was demanding my ruin in a courtroom. They were coordinating their assaults through the whispers and paranoia generated by Aunt Brenda. They thought they had me surrounded. They did not know they were marching toward a heavily fortified position. The next phase of the battle would not be fought with raised voices or slamming doors. It would be fought with binding contracts and irrevocable legal clauses. I reached for my phone to schedule a meeting with my legal counsel. It was time to let Ryan walk into the courtroom and spring his own trap. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of Thorne & Associates at precisely 9 in the morning. The reception area smelled of lemon polish and fresh espresso. I did not stop at the front desk. I walked straight down the carpeted hallway toward the corner suite. Evelyn Thorne was expecting me. Evelyn was not a lawyer who offered sympathy or warm smiles. She was a tactical weapon in a tailored charcoal blazer. She viewed human emotion as a severe liability. She viewed contracts as the only universal truth. When I needed to build the legal walls around my holding company 5 years ago, she was the architect. I stepped into her office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the snow-capped Rocky Mountains. Evelyn sat behind a sleek glass desk. A thick manila folder rested in front of her. "Have a seat, Charmaine." She gestured to the leather chair opposite her desk. Her voice was crisp and businesslike. "I reviewed the emergency motion your ex-husband filed with the county family court. He hired a mid-tier firm. They are loud, but they are sloppy." I sat down and crossed my legs. The leather of the chair creaked softly. I placed my purse on the floor. "I told you about the bank record his private investigator obtained. He believes I hid a rainy day fund right before our settlement." Evelyn adjusted her silver reading glasses. She opened the folder and smoothed the top page with her palm. "Ryan is alleging fraudulent concealment of marital assets. He is petitioning the judge to issue a subpoena for a full forensic audit of your financial history over the past half-decade. He wants to tear down the privacy walls and inspect every single account tied to your Social Security number." My pulse maintained a slow and steady rhythm. A forensic audit was the one thing I could not allow. If court-appointed accountants started digging, they would inevitably follow the digital trail. They would bypass my personal checking accounts and locate the blind holding company. From there, it was a short, straight line to my corporate entity. The luxury apartment complex, the commercial retail spaces, and the pending distressed debt acquisition would all become public record. My family would read about it in a court transcript. Can he secure the subpoena? I asked the question while keeping my gaze fixed on the paperwork. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. A rare, thin smile touched the corners of her mouth. If this were a standard divorce decree, he might have a fighting chance. Judges hate hidden assets. If he presented that bank transfer to a sympathetic bench, they might grant the discovery motion just to be safe. She paused and reached for a secondary file resting on the edge of her desk. It was bound in dark blue leather. But Ryan did not sign a standard decree. Evelyn opened the blue binder. She flipped past several pages of dense legal jargon. He was so terrified you might try to claim a portion of his future software commissions or his stock options that he insisted his own lawyers draft a custom document. "Do you remember the mediation sessions?" I remembered them with crystal clarity. 5 years ago, Ryan sat across a mahogany table sweating through his expensive dress shirt. He was convinced his career was about to skyrocket. He viewed me as a potential parasite who might return years later to demand a cut of his anticipated wealth. He wanted a clean break. He demanded an ironclad guarantee that I could never touch his future corporate earnings or his investments. He wanted to protect his incoming stock vests. I recalled the memory out loud. He told the mediator he built his career on his own, and I had no right to his intellectual property or his corporate shares. Exactly. Evelyn tapped a manicured fingernail against a specific paragraph near the bottom of the page. And in his rush to lock you out of his future, he demanded a reciprocal waiver of corporate and individual enterprise discovery. It is an irrevocable clause. She turned the document around and slid it across the glass desk toward me. I looked down at the highlighted text. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was unmistakable. Both parties explicitly waived the right to ever audit, subpoena, or claim ownership of any corporate entity, limited liability company, or blind trust established by the other party post-separation. The waiver was permanent. It contained a punitive clause stating that any attempt to breach this agreement would result in the immediate dismissal of the motion, and the offending party would be responsible for all legal fees. I read the words twice. The crisp black ink detailed my absolute protection. Ryan had engineered his own execution. He built a fortress to keep me out of his imaginary riches and accidentally locked himself out of my actual empire. He signed this. I traced the bold signature at the bottom of the page. The ink was faded, but the intent was permanent. He practically demanded it. Evelyn closed the file. He drafted the cage and handed you the only key. If his current lawyers were competent, they would have read the original decree before filing this emergency motion. But they saw the illegal bank record and got greedy. They rushed to the courthouse expecting an easy payday. What happens when we present this to the judge? I asked the question knowing the answer, but wanting to hear it spoken aloud. Evelyn removed her glasses and set them down. The judge will read the waiver. The judge will look at Ryan and his overpriced legal team. Then the judge will dismiss his motion with prejudice. He will be legally barred from ever filing a similar claim again. And per his own punitive clause, he will be forced to pay my hourly rate for having to show up and point out his mistake. A quiet satisfaction settled over me. It was not a fiery or dramatic victory. It was the elegant, quiet machinery of the law functioning exactly as it was designed. Ryan thought he was laying a trap. He did not realize he was stepping onto a landmine he buried himself half a decade ago. He is drowning in debt on that suburban house. I noted the fact with detached observation. The property value dropped 15% this quarter. The roof needs replacing. He took out a second mortgage to keep up appearances, and now he will add a mountain of wasted legal fees to that ledger. Evelyn stood up and walked over to the window. Let him show up to the hearing. Let him sit in the courtroom and dream about taking half of your savings. We will let the judge deliver the final blow. It is the most poetic outcome available. I stood up and smoothed the fabric of my slacks. Thank you, Evelyn. I will see you at the courthouse. I left the office and rode the elevator down to the ground floor. The Denver morning air felt sharp and clean. The legal threat was neutralized. My corporate veil remained impenetrable. Ryan was going to walk into a courtroom expecting a payday and walk out with a financial death sentence. His greed blinded him to the fine print of his own making. I walked down the city sidewalk toward my parked car. The first wave of the attack was handled. Derek had failed to intimidate me in my living room. Ryan had failed to sue me in family court. The men in my life who relied on bluster and arrogance were collapsing under the weight of their own flawed strategies. But the silence left in their wake felt temporary. I unlocked my car door and slid into the driver's seat. I checked my phone before starting the engine. There was a missed call from Marcus, my head concierge at the apartment building. He did not leave a voicemail. He sent a single encrypted text message instead. The situation in the lobby has escalated. The message read in stark black text. The private investigator did not return. The woman who hired him is here. She is demanding to speak with the property manager. I gripped the leather steering wheel. The material felt tight and warm under my palms. The men had retreated, but Aunt Brenda was not bound by the same predictable ego. She operated on sheer, frantic desperation. Her retirement fund was vanishing alongside Derek's house. She was not going to rely on cheap investigators or sloppy lawyers anymore. She was bringing the war directly to my front door. I started the engine. The low hum of the motor vibrated through the floorboards. Brenda thought she could bully the staff of a luxury building to uncover my secrets. She thought she was launching a surprise invasion. She had no idea she was walking right into the heart of the kingdom she despised. The final pieces were moving into place, and it was time to return home to greet my guest. The drive from the legal district back to the residential sector of Denver offered a clear view of a city bracing for a severe recession. I navigated my sedan through the morning traffic. The sky above the mountains hung low and heavy with gray clouds. Retail storefronts that once displayed expensive boutique items now sat vacant with lease signs taped to the glass. The economic downturn was no longer a looming threat. It was a physical reality, altering the landscape. My phone vibrated against the center console. The encrypted Bluetooth system integrated with the car speakers chimed softly. I tapped the steering wheel control to accept the incoming call. Marcus spoke immediately. His voice was a calm, steady baritone cutting through the ambient noise of the vehicle. "Good morning, Ms. Harris. I apologize for interrupting your commute. We have an escalating situation on the ground floor." I kept my eyes on the brake lights of the truck ahead of me. "Tell me what is happening, Marcus." "Your aunt has bypassed the exterior security perimeter." He maintained his professional composure, but I could hear a faint edge of tension. "She slipped through the revolving glass doors behind a delivery courier. She is currently standing in the center of the main reception area. She is demanding to speak with the property manager and requesting access to the resident financial archives." In the background of the audio feed, I could hear a distinct sound. It was the soft, rhythmic static crackling over the radio clipped to his uniform lapel. The frequency hissed every time the lobby security team adjusted their positions. Beneath that electronic interference, I could hear the shrill, frantic echoes of a woman losing her grip on reality. "She claims she has a legal right to review your lease agreement." Marcus continued, detailing the absurd invasion. "She told the front desk staff that she is conducting a private investigation into your insolvency. I have instructed the security personnel to maintain a respectful distance, but she is pacing near the marble columns like a trapped animal. She looks highly unstable, Ms. Harris. Would you like me to contact local law enforcement to arrange an escort off the premises?" I considered the proposal. Having the police remove my mother's sister from my own commercial property would provide a swift resolution. It would end the immediate public spectacle. However, it would also tip my hand prematurely. "Do not call the authorities, Marcus." I steered the car into the exclusive subterranean parking garage reserved for building owners. "I am arriving right now. Keep her contained in the visitor lounge. Offer her a glass of sparkling water. Let her believe she is intimidating the staff. Do not confirm or deny any details regarding my residency. I will handle this from the control room." "Understood completely," he replied before disconnecting the line. Marcus possessed a fierce loyalty that money alone could not buy. When I purchased the apartment complex 2 years ago, the previous management company had severely underpaid the operational staff. I immediately audited the payroll. I doubled his salary and provided comprehensive health care benefits for his entire family. He knew exactly who signed his checks. He recognized the difference between the arrogant tenants who treated him like a servant and the silent owner who respected his expertise. He would never betray my confidence to a frantic woman shouting in the foyer. I parked in my designated spot and retrieved my phone. A new notification glowed on the screen. It was a lengthy text message from Maya. Maya possessed an unparalleled ability to gather corporate and social intelligence. She had spent the morning quietly reaching out to mutual acquaintances in the Boulder area. Her message provided the exact context I needed to understand the lobby invasion. "Brenda is near a total psychological breakdown," Maya wrote in the detailed text. "I just spoke with a realtor friend who handled Derek's initial property purchase. Brenda did not just co-sign that catastrophic mortgage. She liquidated her entire state pension to cover his massive down payment. She also pulled out a high-interest personal loan to fund Jessica's failing interior design business. Brenda has absolutely zero liquid assets left. If Derek defaults on the house, the bank will seize her retirement accounts to cover the deficit. She is completely tied to his sinking ship. I read the words twice while standing in the quiet, concrete garage. The revelation illuminated the dark corners of my aunt's psychology. For decades, Brenda had weaponized her modest financial stability against the rest of the family. She constantly reminded everyone about her secure pension and her pristine credit score. She used her status as a weapon to demand respect and obedience. But beneath that arrogant exterior, she harbored a desperate need to elevate her son into the upper echelon of American society. She wanted Derek to be a wealthy software executive so badly that she gambled her entire life savings on his fragile illusion of success. Now the illusion was shattering. The federal interest rates were skyrocketing. The tech bubble was bursting. Derek's commissions were gone. The system they both worshipped was actively preparing to destroy them. Brenda was not invading my building out of sheer spite. She was invading because she was terrified. She needed me to be a failure so she could extract whatever meager savings she imagined I possessed to save her own skin. I walked toward the secure service elevator and swiped my biometric access card. The stainless steel doors slid open. I rode the carriage directly to the 7th floor security hub, bypassing my penthouse entirely. The control room was a dark, quiet space illuminated by dozens of high-definition monitors. The head of security nodded silently as I entered. I approached the primary screen displaying the ground floor camera feed. Brenda looked unrecognizable. The woman who usually wore immaculate tailored suits and heavy gold jewelry was dressed in a wrinkled beige trench coat. Her hair was unkempt. She paced frantically back and forth across the imported Italian marble. She clutched a faux leather handbag tightly against her chest. She cornered a young valet attendant, pointing her finger aggressively in his face, while he maintained a stoic professional silence. She looked small. She looked pathetic. Watching her harass my employees crystallized a cold, hard truth in my mind. Setting boundaries was a passive strategy. Changing my phone number, avoiding family gatherings, and ignoring their insults had not protected me. My relatives operated like starving parasites. They would never respect a closed door. They would simply break the hinges. They would continue to hunt me, dig into my past, hire cheap investigators, and file frivolous lawsuits until they consumed every ounce of my energy and resources. Defensive tactics were no longer sufficient. I turned away from the security monitors. I thanked the guard and took the private stairwell up to my penthouse apartment. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me, sealing out the chaos of the world below. The quiet hum of the city traffic vibrated through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. I walked directly to my minimalist home office. I bypassed the leather-bound ledger today. I needed the digital architecture of modern finance. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and powered on my encrypted workstation. It was time to transition from observation to execution. It was time to move from defense to absolute offense. I opened my secure web browser and navigated to a highly specialized commercial banking portal. This was not a consumer interface. This was a private institutional exchange network used by hedge funds and corporate holding companies to trade massive blocks of debt. I retrieved a titanium security token from my locked desk drawer. I pressed the biometric sensor and typed the randomly generated alphanumeric code into the login screen. The portal granted me access. The screen populated with endless columns of financial data, red and green tickers, and active auctions for distressed assets. I filtered the search parameters. I entered the specific identification code for Apex Regional Bank. The system immediately displayed the bank's current liquidations. As predicted, the institution was bleeding capital from the sudden influx of bad variable rate mortgages. They were desperately packaging these toxic loans into bulk portfolios and selling them at a severe discount to anyone willing to assume the risk. I narrowed the search criteria further, specifying the exact zip code of Derek's suburban neighborhood in Boulder. The system returned a single active portfolio. It contained 32 distressed residential mortgages. I clicked the attached spreadsheet and scrolled down the list of addresses. My eyes stopped on line 14. There it was, Derek's 5-bedroom mansion, the property he used to mock my lifestyle, the house that consumed Brenda's entire pension, the physical monument to their shared arrogance. The asking price for the entire portfolio was substantial, but it was well within the liquid cash reserves of my blind holding company. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a trace of guilt or hesitation. I moved my cursor to the execution button. I authorized the wire transfer from my corporate treasury directly to Apex Regional Bank. I digitally signed the purchasing agreement, acknowledging the assumption of all servicing rights and collection authorities for the enclosed properties. The screen refreshed, displaying a green confirmation checkmark. The transaction cleared instantly. I leaned back in my chair and watched the digital receipt materialize. Apex Regional Bank no longer owned the debt. They were out of the equation. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a stack of heavy ivory cardstock. I selected a fresh piece and placed it on the glass surface. I uncapped my fountain pen. The steel nib glided smoothly across the expensive paper. I drafted a formal legal notice of immediate acceleration. I demanded the total outstanding balance of the mortgage to be paid in full within 3 business days due to the repeated violation of the monthly payment covenants. I signed the bottom of the document using the official title of the holding company director. Brenda was currently downstairs demanding to know who my landlord was. She was completely unaware that as of 3 minutes ago, I had just become her son's bank. The invasion of my privacy was over. The hostile takeover of their lives had officially begun. I picked up my phone to summon a courier. Derek would receive the certified letter before the sun went down. The digital clock on my desk displayed the changing minute. Time moved slowly when millions were at stake. I stared at the glowing monitor illuminating my dark office. The portal presented the raw data of financial ruin. Apex Regional Bank was hemorrhaging cash. Their executives needed a lifeline immediately. They packaged 32 residential mortgages into one massive bundle. The face value exceeded $20 million, but desperation drove the asking price down to a mere $15. My holding company held more than enough liquid capital to absorb the entire package. I reviewed the attached spreadsheet again. Line 14 held the ultimate prize. My cousin resided in a bloated 5-bedroom mansion heavily financed by this exact institution. His obligation was now a toxic liability, dragging the lender toward insolvency. The broker managing this specific asset sale for the lender was an interesting variable. Her name was Chloe. She was Jessica's older half-sister, an intelligent, driven African-American woman who spent her entire adult life navigating the brutal hierarchy of corporate finance. Chloe and I shared a mutual disdain for the pretentious charade Derek maintained. While Jessica squandered borrowed money on frivolous interior design projects, Chloe earned her living liquidating bad investments. She possessed no illusions about her brother-in-law. However, she remained fiercely protective of her younger sibling. Chloe wanted to quietly offload this toxic obligation to an anonymous private equity firm before foreclosure proceedings destroyed Jessica's credit completely. She had no idea the anonymous buyer sitting on the other side of the encrypted terminal was me. A secure chat window materialized on the lower right corner of the screen. The institutional liaison initiated contact. "We are prepared to execute the transfer agreement." The text blinked against the white background. "Please confirm your readiness to assume all servicing rights and collection authorities for the enclosed properties." I placed my right hand over the wireless mouse. The smooth plastic felt cool beneath my palm. My index finger hovered above the primary button. I thought about the years of condescending remarks. I recalled the arrogant smirks at family gatherings when they mocked my modest lifestyle. They constructed a false narrative where I represented the ultimate failure while they embodied the American dream. My finger pressed downward. The distinct, satisfying click of the laptop mouse echoed through the silent room. That single microscopic sound finalized the multi-million-dollar acquisition. It was not a gesture of vengeance fueled by emotion. It was a perfectly executed maneuver, operating strictly within the ironclad boundaries of commercial real estate law. The digital escrow released the massive sum of capital from my corporate treasury. The funds vanished from my ledger and reappeared instantly within the starving accounts of the financial institution. The screen flashed green, confirming the authorized exchange. The deed was done. The trap snapped shut. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair. The air in the room felt different. The invisible hierarchy of our lineage had just inverted completely. The broke renter they pitied so deeply was now the sole sovereign creditor controlling their destiny. I typed my final instruction into the secure chat interface. The purchasing entity requires the original lender to issue immediate formal notification to all affected borrowers. Send the certified letters today. Advise them that their obligations have been assigned to a new servicing agency. Message received and acknowledged. The liaison replied swiftly. Official correspondence will be dispatched via priority mail this afternoon. I closed the connection. The institutional portal faded into the background, leaving my desktop bare. I stood up from the desk and walked toward the expansive windows overlooking the city. The storm clouds gathered over the distant mountains, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and black. The legal machinery was now in motion. Chloe would process the paperwork exactly as instructed. She would authorize the mailroom to send out those terrifying letters, completely unaware she was delivering her sister directly into my hands. By tomorrow morning, Derek would walk down his manicured driveway to retrieve the mail. He would find a heavy envelope bearing the unmistakable logo of his primary lender. He would tear the paper open, expecting a final warning or a desperate plea for payment. Instead, he would discover a terrifying revelation. His bank had abandoned him. They sold his debt to an unknown, faceless corporation. A corporation that did not offer grace periods or negotiate settlement plans. The immediate conflict would detonate inside his living room. He would panic. He would call the customer service hotline demanding answers. The representatives would inform him they no longer held access to his file. They would direct him to the new ownership group. He would search for the holding company online and find nothing but encrypted firewalls and registered agent addresses leading to empty office suites. His control over his own life was officially revoked. My phone buzzed against the glass surface of the table. I picked the device up. Maya was calling. I answered the line without a formal greeting. "You did it." Her voice carried a mixture of awe and nervous energy. My sources at the Regulatory Commission just flagged a massive bulk transfer out of Apex. The entire residential tranche is gone. They are celebrating in the executive suites right now. They think they survived the quarter. They survived because I threw them a raft. I replied, keeping my tone flat and measured, but I kept the cargo. "What happens next?" Maya asked. I watched a drop of rain strike the thick window pane. The weather was breaking. We let the Postal Service do its job. We let the reality of the situation infiltrate his false sense of security. I disconnected the call. The silence of the apartment wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. The board was set. The pieces were locked into their new positions. Derek built his identity upon the foundation of a house he never truly owned. He believed his status protected him from the consequences of his extreme greed. He was wrong. The doorbell rang. The sound shattered the quiet atmosphere of the penthouse. It was a sharp, demanding chime. Marcus was still downstairs managing the lobby. He would never allow an unannounced guest to access the private elevator without my explicit permission. That meant whoever was standing on the other side of my door possessed a biometric override code. Only one person outside of the building management held that specific clearance. I walked across the reclaimed wood flooring. My footsteps made no sound. I reached the entryway and checked the security monitor mounted on the wall. The high-definition camera displayed the hallway. Ryan stood under the recessed lighting. My former husband wore a rumpled gray suit. His tie hung loosely around his collar. The confident swagger he usually carried was completely absent. He held a thick manila folder clamped tightly under his left arm. The family court hearing regarding his emergency motion to freeze my assets had concluded less than an hour ago. He looked like a man who had just survived a horrific collision. His face was pale. His eyes darted nervously around the empty corridor. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. "We need to talk, Charmaine." Ryan spoke quickly before I could deny him entry. His voice lacked its usual arrogant edge. It sounded thin and desperate. The judge threw out the discovery motion. He enforced the punitive clause from the original decree. I remained standing in the threshold, blocking his path into my home. "I am aware of the outcome. Evelyn sent me the transcript. You owe my legal team a substantial sum for wasting their morning." He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "It is worse than that." He took a hesitant step closer. "The judge ordered me to cover the immediate penalty within 14 days. If I fail to produce the cash, he will issue a bench warrant for contempt." I crossed my arms over my chest. "That sounds like a personal dilemma, Ryan. It has nothing to do with me. You do not understand." He gripped the manila folder so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I do not have the money. My software shares tanked yesterday. The secondary mortgage on the house is completely tapped out. I am drowning." He was experiencing the exact same financial suffocation Derek was enduring. Their parallel paths of unchecked greed had led them to the identical dead end. I lowered my gaze to the folder tucked under his arm. What is in the envelope? Ryan slowly pulled the document out. He held it forward like a white flag of surrender. "It is a full forensic accounting of my personal estate. Everything I own, every account, every liability." He pushed the paperwork into my hands. "I am begging you to review it." He whispered the plea. His pride was utterly demolished. "If you can cover this court sanction and keep me out of jail, I will sign over the deed to the suburban property. I will give you everything. Just do not let me go under." I held the thick stack of paper. The irony was intoxicating. The man who spent thousands of dollars trying to audit my life was now voluntarily surrendering his own financial soul at my doorstep. The predator had willingly climbed into the cage and handed me the padlock. I looked at Ryan. The man I once promised to build a future with was nothing more than a hollow shell. I stepped back into the foyer and pulled the door shut, leaving him standing alone in the cold hallway. The power dynamic had shifted indeed. I walked toward my desk and placed his entire life onto the glass surface. It was time to dissect the remains. The morning sun breached the peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the exclusive Boulder subdivision. Derek stood beside his massive kitchen island. He gripped a cold porcelain mug filled with lukewarm black coffee. The sprawling 5-bedroom estate remained deathly quiet. Upstairs, his wife Jessica slept beneath heavy silk sheets, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic financial ruin hovering directly above their heads. Derek stared blankly through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors leading to the empty backyard patio. He purchased this towering structure during the peak of the software boom. Back then, tech sales felt like an endless fountain of unearned wealth. He relied on aggressive charisma and bloated commission checks to fund a lifestyle designed exclusively to manufacture envy among his peers. He never bothered to read the fine print on his adjustable-rate mortgage. He assumed the market would simply climb upward forever. American society taught him that confidence and a tailored suit were the only requirements for eternal prosperity. Now, the tech bubble had violently burst. The Federal Reserve hiked interest rates to brutal levels. His monthly housing obligation had tripled in less than a year. The granite countertops and imported Italian tile surrounding him no longer represented success. They represented a lavish prison. A sudden flash of white caught his attention through the front bay window. The Federal Postal Carrier vehicle hummed to a stop beside his brick mailbox. Derek set his ceramic mug down on the counter. The dull thud echoed in the silent kitchen. He desperately needed a distraction from his spiraling thoughts. He expected the delivery worker to simply drop off the usual array of glossy magazines and credit card pre-approvals. Instead, the uniformed man exited the truck holding an electronic signature pad and a thick envelope. A heavy knot of pure dread formed inside his stomach. Debt collectors rarely required certified signatures unless they were preparing a major legal maneuver. He walked toward the mahogany front entrance. His steps felt slow and heavy against the hardwood flooring. He pulled the heavy barrier open and stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The postal worker greeted him with a polite nod, extending the digital scanner. Derek grabbed the plastic stylus. His hand trembled slightly as he scribbled a jagged, unreadable shape across the glowing screen. The worker handed over the parcel and returned to the idling truck. Derek looked down at the correspondence. The return address block featured the stark blue logo of Apex Regional Bank. This was the primary institution holding the massive note on his property. He assumed it was just another standard warning regarding late fees. He had missed 3 consecutive payments, but the banking sector was notoriously slow. He figured he possessed at least another 6 months before they initiated any serious structural actions against his residence. He gripped the top edge of the thick ivory envelope. He jammed his thumb under the sealed flap and yanked upward with a surge of frustrated energy. The premium paper possessed an incredibly sharp edge. As he violently crushed the packaging in his shaking hands, the stiff flap sliced deeply across the skin of his right thumb. A sudden stinging pain flared through his digits. He gasped, dropping the ruined envelope onto the porch. A bright crimson bead of blood welled up from the fresh laceration. It was a glaring physical reminder of his vulnerability. The sharp sting radiated through his hand, mirroring the sudden sharp reality of his impending destruction. He ignored the bleeding wound and reached down to retrieve the folded document resting on the welcome mat. Derek unfolded the thick pages. The legal jargon jumped off the crisp white surface. The heading did not mention late penalties or grace periods. The bold black letters spelled out a terrifying phrase: notice of immediate acceleration and initiation of foreclosure proceedings. His eyes scanned the paragraphs. The text stated that his lender had permanently terminated their relationship. Due to 90 days of complete non-payment, Apex Regional Bank chose to liquidate his toxic asset. They officially sold his debt portfolio to an independent private equity firm. He no longer owed the forgiving, slow-moving corporate bank. He was entirely at the mercy of a new sovereign creditor. He read the name of the purchasing entity printed at the bottom of the page: C. Harris Holdings, LLC. The name triggered a faint, uncomfortable memory, but his panicked brain could not immediately place it. He knew he could not intimidate a faceless corporate shell. When dealing with traditional bankers, he could utilize his aggressive sales tactics to secure extensions. He could charm loan officers or threaten public relations nightmares. But a private holding company operated entirely within the shadows. They possessed no public-facing branches. They existed purely to extract capital and enforce contracts. Derek rushed back inside the house, slamming the door shut. He sprinted past the grand staircase and entered his customized home office. He threw himself into his leather chair and powered on his sleek desktop computer. He needed to uncover the identity of the registered agent managing this mysterious organization. He needed a target to attack. His fingers hammered against the mechanical keyboard. He navigated swiftly toward the official state business registry database. He typed the exact LLC designation into the search bar and pressed enter. The screen flashed as the servers retrieved the public filing data. The digital page populated with stark, uncompromising facts. The registered executive director was listed clearly: Charmaine Harris. Derek stopped breathing. The air trapped inside his lungs suddenly felt toxic. He stared at the glowing monitor, refusing to accept the visual information. He scrolled down to the registered mailing address. The text displayed the exact street number and penthouse suite located in the premier downtown Denver high-rise. It was the precise location where he had stood less than 48 hours ago, begging for a bridge loan. The horrifying truth descended upon him with the crushing weight of a falling anvil. His quiet, unassuming cousin did not just rent a luxury unit, she owned the entire holding firm. The woman he relentlessly mocked at family gatherings, the woman he publicly labeled a broke failure, completely controlled his destiny. She possessed the liquid capital to casually purchase a multi-million-dollar residential debt package during a severe economic downturn. She literally held the deed to his life. The power dynamic inverted violently inside his mind. Every arrogant comment he ever made, every condescending smirk he aimed in her direction, played back through his memory. He realized his fatal miscalculation. He spent years judging Charmaine by the cheap vintage watch on her wrist and her refusal to purchase depreciating luxury vehicles. He mistook her profound financial discipline for poverty. While he leveraged his future to buy status symbols, she quietly constructed an impenetrable empire. He stared at his bleeding thumb. The pain throbbed in rhythm with his racing heart. He was utterly trapped. He could not bully C. Harris Holdings, LLC. He could not manipulate a legal entity designed specifically to strip him of his remaining dignity. Panic consumed his rational thoughts. He grabbed his smartphone from the desk and frantically dialed his mother. The line rang 3 times before Brenda answered. Her voice sounded thin and exhausted. "Mom, you have to fix this immediately." Derek screamed into the receiver, abandoning any pretense of composure. His vocal cords strained under the sheer terror gripping his throat. "Charmaine bought my mortgage. She bought the whole debt from the regional lender. She is initiating foreclosure proceedings against my property today." He paced wildly around the confined office space. His Italian loafers scuffed against the imported rug. "You have to call her right now," he demanded, his tone reaching a hysterical pitch. "You have to force her to forgive this balance. Tell her she owes our family. Tell her I will ruin her reputation if she steals my residence. Use your leverage, Mom. Make her stop this process." A long, chilling silence emanated from the mobile speaker. The absence of Brenda's usual commanding authority sent a fresh wave of ice through his veins. "I cannot force Charmaine to do anything, Derek." Brenda finally spoke. Her words sounded hollow, devoid of all the arrogant pride she possessed her entire life. "Why not?" Derek yelled, gripping the phone so tightly the plastic casing groaned. "You are her elder. You control the family narrative.